Welcome to Inside the Director's Circle and this episode on the rise of chatbots. What does this mean for us as leaders? And more importantly, what are the legal implications? I'm Jason Langford Brown, your host, founder of the Director's Circle, practicing business advisor and coaching psychologist. I think we're all now aware of the massive explosion of AI tools. Chat GPT is probably the obvious one, but there are scores more that are doing similar or slightly different things. And I'm seeing more and more examples of how these are being used. But I'm also getting more questions about, what are the security risks around that? What are the legal implications? So I thought today we'd kind of turn the lens slightly differently on this explosion of AI and see where we ought to be focusing as leaders. So as always, we like to add some expertise to these subjects. And one of our knowledge partners, Trows and Hamlin, are with us again, as they were on our last episode around cyber. We have Liz. Liz is a senior associate, works in a dispute resolution team, specializes in, among many things, disputes around cybersecurity and risk and fraud. And with her also from her team, Amy Rose, also an associate, who was also a specialist in cybersecurity and data disputes, and works with a combination of PLCs, SMEs, and personal high net worth individuals. So welcome both to the show. Just very quickly before we get into the conversation, just remember this is just a snapshot of what happens with our business leader community. So if you want to get more involved or access a further insight, just visit us at directors-circle.com. So I think today, Amy Rose, we'll start with you. I suppose for those that have been asleep for the last 18 months, what the hell is a chatbot?
Yes, yeah, exactly. If you've been living under a rock. No, I think it's really good to start with a bit of context. So a chatbot is basically a computer program that uses AI and natural language processing to understand inputted questions. They could be spoken or written, and it produces automated response. So we've seen these on websites you can go onto, and a chat box can pop up and say, how can we help you? Or if you speak to customer services, you want to return a faulty product, 9 times out of 10, you're going to have an automated response come back to you, and you have to go through all these processes before you can actually go through to a human on customer services. So they've been around since about the 1950s. But more recently, we've seen OpenAI produce Chat GPT, which goes beyond the typical chatbot and uses automated responses to generate responses based on the context and sort of tone of the conversation. So there are some key differences between chatbots and Chat GPT, but they're both conversational agents designed to communicate with humans.
Yeah. And obviously the idea being it saves you having to work it all out for yourself and does it in lightning speed.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
So I'm seeing lots of trends with my clients, just maybe a few trends that you're seeing around chatbots at the moment in terms of applications or just the technology in general.
Yeah, sure, Jason. So yeah, we're in a rapidly evolving digital world, aren't we? And that means that customer expectations are increasingly on the increase. Many consumers expect 24/7 responses, and that's I think how one of the reasons why chatbots have evolved to the likes of Chat GPT now. Some of the trends we're seeing in terms of, I guess, the use of Chat GPT, most of our clients that we've spoken to are using it to maximise productivity, which is a really good positive message. So I spoke to an online education provider the other day that they're using it to streamline their marketing process, albeit it being monitored throughout. But ultimately, that means they'll be able to provide further courses. It frees up staff time to generate productivity, which is so important. So it's increasingly using chatbots to handle simple tasks. You're reducing, overhead costs, making better use of staff time, and yeah, all in all, it should be a good positive message. I guess you'll be talking about now, Jason, is where does that leave us with the possible risks associated with those?
Yeah, and I think we'll come to that in a second, but I'm just to add to that, I agree with you. I mean, most of my clients, I think, know about it now. If it's not ChatGPT, there are others. There are other chatbots are available. I was talking earlier, I think, to you guys about Microsoft have just launched Copilot, which is their integration of AI into their the Office 365 suite, which for me is much more exciting actually, because automating things that we already do. But I'm with you. I don't see almost, I see very little that isn't anything other than a productivity play at the moment, which I think is great, because I see most industries are saying they're struggling to get quality staff, or they're busy, they're stretched. So anything for me that can take away some of that legwork of the sort of non-value adding tasks, as I would call them.
Yeah.
So I see people resisting it at the moment, very much resisting it around a threat to their jobs. But I'm saying, okay, no, it's a freeing up of productivity and allow you. And I think more importantly, for the people coming through working for them, and the business leaders listening to this, young people that want to do more interesting work, more purposeful work. Well, if you can get a machine to do the stuff that doesn't add any value and nobody likes doing, and then they can be used to use the value adding stuff and the more purpose driven stuff. For me, that's got to be a good thing. And I think even when it gets a bit more nuanced around things like marketing, the sensible people are saying, it's not going to do it for you. If you ask it the right questions, it will give you 80%, but you've still got to do 20%. So you've still got to put the human on top. And I think probably just to finish my little monologue here, I was listening to Bill Gates the other day. Bill Gates saying, don't be this, even he's saying you've got to embrace it. The whole conversation was about embrace it. Don't run away from it. You'll get left behind. But him saying this is not taking over the world anytime soon, probably not even the next 2 generations. It is not a human being. It's not going to be a human being. It should be a tool. So I thought that was quite, I was quite pleased to hear someone like Bill Gates saying that, who people might think has got a slightly different agenda. But I think probably you've already alluded to it. I think this is the thing about today. I am getting asked more and more questions from HRDs, CTOs, about saying, everyone's getting really excited, and I get it, but what does that mean for my people? Are there GDPR risks here? Are there reputational risks? What are the risks? what are the risks? Amy Rose, do you want to start on that?
Yeah, sure. I think before incorporating a chatbot into your own network or using services such as Chat GPT, you've got to think about the potential risks and weigh them up and get feedback from staff as well, I guess. But things like the GDPR point, there's still lots of discussion ongoing about whether Chat GPT is GDPR compliant. So for example, you might have seen recently there has been an example where a Samsung employee has inputted confidential code into Chat GPT, and once it's out there, it's gone. So Samsung have unsurprisingly banned the use of chatbots like Chat GPT because of the risks of inputting data in there. Chat GPT do have warnings before using it, and I think a lot of chatbots do to sort of limit their potential risk, but ultimately they could use their data for training purposes, and once it's out there, it can't be taken back. So I think employees need to be aware of the risks and what they're inputting, and is it personal data, is it personal information, and really think that through before using it, because the AI will collect information about its users. I think there was the case of Clearview AI, which got fined, one of the biggest fines by the ICO for, I think it was 7.5 million for using images of people from the internet without consent. So collection of data, things like that, is really important to be aware of, and also the risks of AI being used by hacking communities. So it could be used to produce sort of really convincing phishing emails. In our last podcast, we were discussing about how they used to be filled with grammatical errors. Chat GPT or any AI can reduce that. They can even actually develop a tone to make it sound a bit more like whichever person they're impersonating, which makes it even more convincing, and an even higher risk if you're giving that chatbot access to your data and to your company's information.
That's really interesting, that last part you said about making it sound more interesting, because I work with copywriters that will use Chat GPT to do a lot of the legwork for their work before they finesse it, but they will put in tone of voice, etc. But I was posted to, even on LinkedIn now, there's a tool there where you can actually get the personality type of the person from their profile. So LinkedIn have got a piece of IO on LinkedIn that says this person is their tone of voice is very direct, big picture, don't give them the details. It's telling you how to communicate with them. So it doesn't take much, does it, for you to take that piece of LinkedIn, Chat GPT, put together a piece of communication that could be incredibly convincing if you received it.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And the risks of that. And I think employee awareness and training is just so important to be conscious of those security risks before integrating or using Chat GPT.
It sounds like they tell you, but you have been warned, but once it's out there, it's out there.
Exactly. And you'll be surprised at how many people don't read the warning signs. I think there's people that don't really understand that sometimes its output isn't always accurate, or might have not read the warning signs. So there's been a case in America of a lawyer who actually used Chat GPT to create precedents for a case against an airline, and actually all the cases Chat GPT came up with were entirely made up. Wow. So the judge was not very happy, but obviously that's a very rare example. I like to think of a lawyer using it in a bad way, but I think the output is another security risk that actually, if it's not proofread, that's a massive danger that you could then be using it and thinking that it's accurate when actually Chat GPT or any AI isn't always going to be.
Well, if you've got, for someone like me, I've got professional indemnity. So if I was to do that and output something incorrect, I mean, that could affect my professional indemnity and all sorts of things. And I was just thinking about when you were talking about just because it's on Instagram doesn't mean it's true. It's something just because it's on Chatbot doesn't mean it's true, does it either? And again, like Instagram, once the picture's there, it's there.
Exactly. I'd agree with that. And if I can just add to Amy's helpful commentary there, chatbot, the Chat GPT itself is also open to manipulation. And they've recently confirmed a data breach on their own system, OpenAI. That was caused by a vulnerability in its open source library. So yes, they did the right thing. They took the system offline until it was fixed, but people shouldn't be blind to the fact that it is a software, it is open to manipulation itself, and hackers, it is possible, as can be seen, for it to be hacked itself. And the danger of that is you could then have a dissemination of misinformation. Yeah. So again, it's checking in with yourself when you're using like chatbots like Chat GPT. Is the information you're getting, is the output reliable and used with caution? Yeah,
absolutely. That's great. So I said in my head, I'm thinking, is there any regulation in place in the UK and wider field for the use of chatbots?
Well, this is very topical. So at the moment, the UK doesn't have regulation in place for AI, and its plan is that it will take a sort of sector-based, regulator-led approach, which means that it wants to make sure it can try and keep up, because at the moment the evolution of AI is faster than any regulator or statutory guidance can be created. So I think the UK is sort of adopting that approach, but it's different in different jurisdictions. So the EU is actually hoping to pass an AI Act at the end of this year, and looking at generative models and whether it can disclose the use of copyrighted materials used to develop those systems. But it's different in China, in Canada. So I think users really need to be aware, depending on the jurisdiction that they're based in or companies that they're contracting with, what regulation they're going to be subject to. But at the moment, the UK doesn't have any. There's non-statutory guidance in place. There's an AI sort of risk toolkit, but at the moment, users would be reliant on existing law, so data protection laws and things like that. So there's not regulation in place at the moment, but we could see. Watch this space.
And I know you're based in the UK, Amy, but just we do have clients and listeners in the US and Australia. I mean, are they China, Australia, US? Are they further ahead? Are they about the same where we are in the UK? I mean, I'm not expecting you for a very technical answer because I know it's not your jurisdiction. But do you get a sense on where they're at generally in those territories?
I think China's very far ahead, as they often are with things like AI, and so is the US. Like we mentioned in the previous podcast, New York is keen for cyber due diligence to be applied to every M&A transaction. So I think the US is definitely keeping up, and I guess countries are looking at each other and seeing what the other's doing as well, and adapting in that sense. But at the moment, it's a bit of a just trying to scramble to keep up with AI, and I'm sure you'll have seen and the listeners will have heard of the letter that's been sent to regulators by many famous people, including sort of the likes of Elon Musk, sort of calling for a 6-month moratorium. It feels like 6 months might not be enough, but just to sort of have a stay and think about regulation and see if we can get some more protection in place before it spirals.
I did see that. And for those listening that don't know what Amy was talking about, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Amy, but I think probably Musk, Gates, Bezos, I think, pretty much every superpower in the world saying, when you got these guys are saying we might have to slow down a bit, we might want to be listening, I think, because it's quite terrifying. And I think, Liz, maybe just back to you, this lack of regulation, what does that mean for businesses, for individuals in the sort of short to medium term?
I think that they need to keep their finger on the pulse, really, to ensure that they are in compliance with any UK and any applicable EU regulation that applies to their business. So I think it's, look at data. I mean, the safety of data inputted into a chatbot is far from watertight. So I think it's important for organisations to do checks on themselves, look at their processes, look at how their data is stored, look at the use of Chat GPT and any other chatbots they're using. And are there any risks that they're seeing through employees using this? Do they need to restrict it in some way? Whilst it is great for maximising efficiency, is there anything they need to do to address any potential risks? Until regulation comes along, I think it's just making sure they are compliant with existing regulations. And also something that is a little bit well, it is connected but off topic, is careful of bias and the use of Chat GPT in respect of your culture, because there is conversation out there at the moment that Chat GPT can sometimes respond, because of the data it's using, they can respond to harmful instructions or exhibit biased behaviour. Now, what's the impact of that on your workforce? And I know there's a piece at the moment around the fairness and the use of bias in chatbots like Chat GPT. So I think that's something to bear in mind as well. Can we explain? Because my next question was going to be, because you mentioned earlier in the conversation about the output's not always accurate. I think you've both mentioned that to a point, and then now you're talking about bias. So I'm sitting there questioning now, to what extent can we trust what comes out of these chatbots? And bias I've never even heard about. So maybe you can expand a bit more on bias, but a bit more generally about how we, how much we trust what it tells us, I suppose, is what I'm asking myself. And if you want to start on that, Liz, and we'll get Amy's view. Yeah, sure. When I was looking at this topic in a bit more detail, I came across, quite ironically, a quote from OpenAI's CEO, Simon Altman, and he's previously warned that Chat GPT is incredibly limited, but good enough at some things to create a misleading impression of greatness. So I think coming from the person who actually created this chatbot, isn't this interesting? It perfectly sums up why freely available public data models like ChatGPT, they cannot be relied, I don't think, on businesses for decision making, and that's one thing to get clear. I think what we're looking at is, and again, I guess the free version of Chat GPT, it only integrates data up to 2021. And again, so for that's a particular risk for industries that rely on real-time data. I mean, that Chat GPT is already outdated. So the platform cannot think for us. And what it does is it aggregates like fact and fiction. So I'm certainly not saying that everything it outputs is not reliable. I mean, you only have to put in, say, ask you to do a structure of an article, and it's pretty much bang on the money in terms of what topics you might want to raise in your article, say for a few inspirational ideas from yourself. So it is good, and I think it should be used as a useful tool, but I don't think it should be relied on completely. I appreciate I've talked a lot there. Amy?
No. Well, before I bring Amy in, I think you hit on a really important point for me there. Other than it's like a little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing, and you just need to know a little bit more than the person you're talking to. That's probably sounds like that's the strategy of AI at the moment. But your point about it can't think, and this is, I mean, just maybe to share some insights from my conversations with business leaders all over the world. Some are really embracing it, and I think you're right. The ones that are really embracing it are using it for productivity plays. They recognize that the better the questions they ask it, the better the information they get out. They recognize it probably only does 80% of the job, and the bit it doesn't do the thinking. You're absolutely right. And the people that are not, I think, embracing the potential of productivity play, from one of a better word, I think are missing the point that, it isn't going to start thinking for us anytime soon, which I think is what Bill Gates was talking about. I think I mentioned earlier in the podcast. And our job is to be human, isn't it? Is to we've got data and information that Chat GPT can probably do more efficiently than us, but it can't think for us. And how we start to embrace and value the fact that we're human and we can do things with that and contextualize it and analyze it and assess it in a way that a machine is probably not going to do, well, possibly ever, but certainly not for the next generation, I suspect. I think it's really interesting.
You mentioned there, Jason, about embracing it, and I think that's really key, because your competitors will be. So, I mean, it will impact how your business evolves going forward in terms of how you use
but it's how you use
AI.
It.
It is how you use it.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, Amy, I cut over you there. Did you want to?
Oh, no, don't worry. I was just going to say that I read somewhere a really... I thought it was really appropriate that actually Chat GPT is like the overly confident apprentice that you have when they come in. Often they get it right, but sometimes they're so convincing in their output that you would believe it's accurate because they have that confidence, and the way that AI produces answers, it's conveyed really confidently, and it's believable. So I think that's a risk, and I think another point that we're seeing in terms of output is things like the fake pictures that it's creating and deepfakes and things like that, which is a concern. It can be amusing, seeing the Pope in a Balenciaga puffer jacket is funny, but the convincingness of the pictures is slightly terrifying. And actually, what could that again, going into the lawyer risk approach, as we often do, how could that be used in a concerning way? And I'm sure there will be instances, but yeah, I think it has to be treated because it is, as we were saying, it's not innovative in the same way as a human is. It's all entirely based on input, so its responses are the input that's been put into it. So would it produce a completely innovative and creative solution? It's actually not in the same way, because it's everything that it's been added into. And I think you raised a really good point that it's only as good as its input. You have to be really careful with the input and the prompts that you're using, and like you were saying, points about tone and things like that. I think that's really important, but absolutely businesses should be embracing it, but just thinking about all the consequences and making sure they have some processes in place.
Yeah, and I think and it is, if you're not very good at input, then you're not going to get very good output. But I think you hit on an even more important point, because you've got me thinking about the context is now in a different way, which is more in my world, where we talk about developing leaders, if you like, as an example, building leadership capability. We know when people learn, the input, which is the knowledge, we'll teach them something. They read a book, it's only 10% of their ability to do it. So you're right. There are lots of people in this world that are highly educated, that have had lots of input, that have no ability to apply that into the real world. So 70% of our ability to do something comes from actually experimenting, being innovative, practicing, making mistakes, and then through feedback, which is the final 20%, we then build that capability level. So that's, you can see why AI is so far off the ability to be human. It's
you see now there's such an emphasis, and rightly so, on diversity and inclusion. I mean, you get the most generation of excellent ideas when you have a diverse workforce, and I think that's the issue with the likes of Chat GPT at the moment. It's this bias point that I was talking about earlier, because it can produce biased results in some circumstances. So I think people using this, business leaders and their employees using this, need to be aware of that it could actually limit idea generation. So it's again the whole awareness piece, the using it but with caution. And we know that the Department of let me get this right, Science, Innovation and Technology is looking at how fairness can be used as a key regulatory guiding factor when deploying and using AI. So that just says it all in itself. I think it's important to not take for granted our diverse workforce and how great they can be towards our business productivity.
Yeah, I think you've just maybe beautifully wrapped up the lot. I know we've done this, our second podcast this was like chatbots, the first one we did around due diligence around cyber, and we landed on this kind of how this kind of drive into technology and processes is stopping people thinking. And I think this is an interesting one about chatbots, again, stopping people thinking or being innovative. So I think, again, for me, it all comes back to all this technology is great, but we've got to keep sight of what adds the value, is that how do we put the human on top of it, really. But I think maybe for me, so many good points, guys, and thank you ever so much for not just for this podcast, but for the last one. I think probably, we've got to lean into this. I think even as lawyers, you're agreeing with that. But the fact that some points that really resonate with me, the fact this is it's not currently GDPR compliant, which I think is interesting. I know once it's in. Regulation is coming, but it's not really here, and it's different all over the world. I think there's just some things for people just to consider. I suppose that probably leads me just a final question for you both is, how as lawyers, how can business leaders really embrace this, but balance off the risk and the caution based on where we are currently? What would be your one piece of advice as lawyers to sort of lean in, but don't fall in? It's probably the question, really.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, sure. I think businesses will need to think about internal processes. So things like we've seen authorized personnel having access to the platform, or maybe built-in safeguards or monitoring the input to then avoid breaches or mitigate risk on issues such as bias. And I think training for staff or running tests is important too, if you're thinking about using a chatbot or an AI such as Chat GPT.
Great, thanks, Rose. Liz?
I think for me, I think we've talked today about chatbots that are great for productivity, increasing business efficiency, and so businesses should embrace it. Otherwise, they are in danger of falling behind their competitors. But I don't think they should force it. I think they should be looking at their business and how AI can be. AI like chatbots can be supplemental to what they already do.
So like being measured and actually think about how does it actually fit into our strategy, into our plan, rather than just playing with it randomly, which I think, to be fair, a lot of people do, and I'd probably include myself in that sometimes. It's like the new Facebook, isn't it? Listen, thank you both, not just for this episode, but also for the last episode. For those, our next podcast, we're going to have a bit of a change of subject, but I want to thank Liz and Amy Rose for joining us for this one, and for those that haven't listened to it, the last podcast we did on cybersecurity and the need for due diligence. If you need more on that subject or this subject, reach out to us at directors-circle.com, and Liz and Amy will both available, I'm sure, to speak about this subject at any point. But in the meantime, thank you for listening to Inside the Director's Circle.